Everyone in the office thinks my CEO is a heartless, soul-crushing monster. He wears tailored Italian suits, never smiles, and speaks in a voice so deep it makes the floorboards vibrate. I was terrified of him, until today when I accidentally grabbed his laptop after a board meeting. I brought it to my desk, typed in my own birthday out of habit, and the screen instantly unlocked. He was using my birthday as his password. And right there on the desktop was a folder labeled Top Secret Plans to Make My Cute Communications Head Fall for Me. Inside were pages of cheesy romantic poetry, doodles of hearts, and an entry from this morning that read, "He wore a soft blue tie today. I almost fainted." I was staring at the screen, giggling like crazy, when the shadow of the Ice King himself fell over my desk. His ears were bright red. And that's the story of how I found out my terrifying boss is actually the biggest dork in the universe. Let me paint you a picture of what it is like to work at Evans & Whitmore Communications, headquartered in Midtown Manhattan on the 42nd floor of a building so glass and steel it practically radiates corporate misery. The rumors about CEO Ethan Evans are, at this point, corporate legend. There is the one about the thermostat. Allegedly, and I say allegedly because I personally witnessed it with my own two eyes, so it is not that alleged, Mr. Evans keeps his office at exactly 50 degrees, year-round, in July, in New York City. The man has a small personal space heater at his own desk because even he gets cold, but the rest of us can simply suffer and contemplate our life choices. The facilities manager, Greg, once tried to bump the thermostat up to 63 degrees on a particularly brutal January morning. Greg was reassigned to the Cincinnati branch by noon. There is also the phenomenon known company-wide as the CEO shadow step. It works like this. Ethan Evans moves through the office without any discernible warning. One moment, the 42nd floor is humming along normally, keyboards clacking, printers whirring, someone microwaving fish in the break room despite the clearly posted signs. The next moment, a hush descends. It starts somewhere near the elevator bank and rolls across the open floor plan like a wave. And every single employee who has been here longer than 3 months knows exactly what that hush means. Monitors are hastily switched from ESPN scores to spreadsheets. Personal calls are abandoned mid-sentence. One time, I watched Derek from Accounts Payable actually dive behind his standing desk and crouch there for 4 full minutes because he had been watching a cooking video on company time. He texted me afterward to say he had survived. He used 3 prayer hands emojis. I found it very funny then. I find it less funny now that I am deeply, hopelessly in love with the man who causes it. But I am getting ahead of myself. My name is Jordan Hayes. I am 28 years old. I take my coffee with oat milk and 1 sugar, and I am the head of corporate communications for Evans & Whitmore. I have been in this role for 2 years, and I am extremely good at it. I coordinate press releases, manage executive messaging, handle media relations, and make sure the company's public-facing voice is always professional, clear, and polished. I am known in this building for 2 things, an absolute refusal to panic in a crisis, and the fact that I am, as my assistant Priya once told me while eating a bag of pretzels and looking at me with unbothered honesty, terrifyingly diplomatic. I take that as a compliment. What I am not known for is getting flustered. I handled a product recall announcement without breaking a sweat. I drafted a press statement during a live investor meltdown while simultaneously eating a granola bar. I have sat across from journalists who were actively trying to rattle me and smiled pleasantly through the whole thing. I was not, however, prepared for what happened on a Tuesday in October. The quarterly board meeting had just wrapped up in the 32nd floor conference room, which is the large, intimidating one with floor-to-ceiling windows and chairs that cost more than my first car. I had been in there for 3 hours presenting the company's Q3 communication strategy, and I had crushed it, if I do say so myself. Ethan Evans had sat at the head of the table the entire time, completely stone-faced, occasionally writing notes in that sharp, precise handwriting of his. He had asked me 2 questions. Both were reasonable. He had not smiled or frowned or given me a single readable human expression. Normal. Totally normal. Completely fine. After the meeting wrapped, everyone grabbed their things and shuffled out into the hallway. I collected my binder, my notes, and my laptop bag and headed back upstairs to my desk on 42. I had a press statement due before end of day, and I was already mentally drafting the opening line. It was not until I sat down, opened the laptop, and tried to log in that I noticed something was wrong. The laptop I had pulled out of my bag was not mine. I knew this because mine has a small scuff on the top right corner from the time I knocked it off my desk trying to swat a fly, and also because when I typed in my password, which is embarrassingly my birthday because I am a person who values convenience over security, the screen unlocked immediately. I stared at it. I typed in my birthday as a reflex, my actual birthday, March 14th, and it had just worked. I sat there for a long moment trying to understand what was happening. Then I looked at the laptop more carefully. Same model as mine, same black case, but there was a tiny silver EE monogrammed on the bottom right corner that my laptop absolutely did not have. I was holding the CEO's laptop. I had unlocked the CEO's laptop using my own birthday. Ethan Evans, the Ice King of New York's corporate world, the man who once made a senior director cry in a budget meeting, the man whose presence alone caused grown professionals to hide under desks, that man's laptop password was my birthday. I sat there very still for approximately 15 seconds, having what I can only describe as a silent internal scream. Then, because I am a curious person who had just discovered something objectively insane, I looked at the desktop. Most laptop desktops are a mess. Mine has 17 browser tabs and a folder I have labeled, "Important, do not open." That is just memes I saved. I expected maybe some spreadsheets, a few PDFs, the usual executive clutter. What I got instead was a desktop that was impeccably clean. Only 4 folders arranged in a perfect row, except for one folder sitting slightly off to the side, like someone had created it in a hurry and then tried very hard to pretend it did not exist. The folder was labeled "Top Secret Plans to Make My Cute Communications Head Fall for Me." I made a sound. I'm not sure what sound it was. It was somewhere between a gasp, a laugh, and a wheeze, and Priya, sitting at the desk across from me, said, "You okay?" "Yes," I said, in a voice that was at least 2 octaves too high. "Totally fine, working." She looked at me for a second longer, shrugged, and went back to her screen. I, meanwhile, had opened the folder with shaking hands. It contained 11 documents. 11! The first one was titled Poem Draft 7, and it was about my eyes. It compared them to the color of the lake in Central Park on a clear morning, and then, in a note at the bottom, the author had written, "Too cheesy? Google says cheesy-like. He is not a woman. Does he like cheesy? He smiled at the elevator door last Wednesday. I think he might be an angel." The second document was a bulleted list titled Jordan's Preferences, Confirmed versus Suspected, and it was organized into 2 columns. Confirmed included things like oatmeal lattes, the color navy blue, and the window seat in the conference room. Suspected included things like jazz, unclear, needs more data, and dogs. He pet the building dog twice this week, high likelihood. The building dog is named Pretzel. He belongs to the security guard on the lobby level. I do pet him twice a week. This information was accurate. I was giggling. I was sitting at my desk in a professional office building in Midtown Manhattan, holding my CEO's laptop, reading romantic poetry he had written about me, and absolutely losing it. The third document was a journal, or something that functioned like a journal. It had daily entries, short ones, most of them, about work, but with small observations scattered throughout. 3 weeks ago, he handled the Marcus crisis perfectly. I wanted to tell him that in the meeting, but I didn't want it to sound like more than it was. It was more than it was. 2 weeks ago, he laughed at something the intern said in the break room today. I heard it from the hallway. I stood there for a second too long. Unprofessional. Noted. And then this morning's entry, which was the one that made me cover my mouth with both hands. He wore a soft blue tie today, exact shade of pale blue. I almost fainted. Get it together, Evans. I was fully, completely gone at this point. My face hurt from smiling, my eyes were watering from trying not to laugh out loud. I had one hand pressed over my mouth and the other gripping the edge of the desk. And that is when the shadow fell over me. It was a very specific kind of shadow, the kind that comes with absolute silence from the surrounding area because everyone within a 10-foot radius had frozen and was now pointedly looking at their screens with the focus of people who wanted no part of whatever was about to happen. I looked up. Ethan Evans was standing at my desk. He was in his full Ice King configuration, charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, expression of total neutral authority. He looked at me. He looked at the laptop on my desk. He looked at me again. His ears were the color of a fire truck. We stared at each other. I could see the exact moment he realized I had opened the folder because the ears went from fire truck red to a shade I can only describe as emergency broadcast red. "Mr. Hayes," he said in his deep, perfectly controlled boardroom voice. "I believe that may be my laptop." "I believe it is," I said back, in my most professional tone, because I am Jordan Hayes and I do not lose my composure at work. Then I looked down at the screen, looked back up at him, and said nothing else. The silence stretched out for about 4 full seconds. And then, for the first time in 2 years of working together, I watched Ethan Evans turn around and walk back to the elevator without another word, fast, faster than I had ever seen him move in a building where he usually walked like he owned the place, which, technically, he did. I closed the laptop gently. Priya appeared at my elbow, approximately 3 seconds later. "What," she said, "was that?" "Nothing," I said, still smiling. "I just need to return something." I spent the rest of the afternoon deciding exactly how to handle this. Option 1. Pretend it never happened. Return the laptop, say nothing, never think about it again. Professional, clean, safe. Option 2. Die of secondhand embarrassment on behalf of Ethan Evans, a man who had, at some point in the last several months, apparently composed 7 drafts of a poem about my eyes and kept a daily log of my tie colors. Option 3. Do something about it. I thought about the journal entries. I thought about "Get it together, Evans." I thought about the fact that the man had memorized my birthday well enough to set it as his password, that he had called me cute in a folder title, that he had stood in a hallway listening to me laugh and then written about it like it was something he wanted to remember. I decided on option 3. The next morning, I went to his office at exactly 9:15, which is when I knew from 2 years of working in this building that his assistant Marcus would be on a coffee run. I carried the laptop under my arm and knocked twice on the heavy oak door. "Come in." He was at his desk, reading something. He looked up, saw me, and went very still. The ears, I noted, were already pink. I walked across the office, set the laptop on his desk, and said, with complete professional calm, "I believe this belongs to you, Mr. Evans." He nodded once. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes." I paused. Then I said, just as professionally, just as calmly, "Your poetry is truly beautiful." The effect was instantaneous. Ethan Evans, CEO, iron-spined ruler of the 42nd floor, tried to stand up from his desk too quickly, clipped the edge of his chair with his knee, sent a pen rolling off the desk, knocked over his water glass, caught the water glass before it fell, and then stood there holding a dripping water glass and a pen with the expression of a man whose entire personality had just short-circuited. I kept a completely straight face. I am a professional. He started, stopped, looked at the laptop, looked at me. "The folder was very organized," I offered. His jaw worked for a second. The tips of his ears were now beyond any color I had previously documented. "Mr. Hayes," he set the water glass down very carefully, "I owe you an apology." "I owe you nothing," I said. "I insist." He straightened, which I recognized as him trying to reconstruct the boardroom composure that had absolutely abandoned him 30 seconds ago. "I would like to take you to dinner, as an apology, if that would be acceptable to you." I looked at him for a moment. The great Ethan Evans, standing behind his desk in his perfect suit, slightly damp from the water glass incident, ears still pink, asking me to dinner with the formal energy of someone requesting a budget approval. That would be very acceptable, I said. He exhaled, slightly. Friday, 7 o'clock. I will make a reservation. I look forward to it, I said, and walked out of his office. I made it approximately 12 steps down the hallway before I ducked into the copy room, put my back against the wall, and pressed both hands over my face, grinning so hard my cheeks ached. Friday dinner was at Carbone in the Village, which is objectively one of the best Italian restaurants in New York, and which told me that Ethan had thought about this and wanted it to go well. He was waiting outside when I arrived, out of the suit for the first time I had ever seen, in dark jeans and a navy shirt, and he looked so human and so genuinely nervous that I wanted to take his hand on the sidewalk immediately. I did not, because Priya follows 3 food blogs, and 2 of them had already reviewed Carbone this month, and I was not interested in being photographed. Dinner started well. He was stiff for the first 10 minutes, all careful questions about my communications background and how I had ended up in New York. But somewhere between the bread and the first course, he started to loosen up, and I got my first real glimpse of the person behind the ice. He was funny, sharp and dry and quick, and he laughed at his own jokes in a way that was completely unguarded. A real laugh, nothing like the corporate non-expression I had spent 2 years trying to read. Then the entrees arrived. Ethan Evans, in what I can only interpret as an attempt to appear worldly and unintimidated in front of me, had ordered the spicy rigatoni vodka with what the menu described as house-made Calabrian chili oil. The description also included, in small print, the words, aggressively spicy. He had missed that part. He took one bite, paused, took another, and then went very, very quiet. "Are you okay?" I asked. "Completely fine," he said in a voice that was slightly tighter than usual. 3 minutes later, his eyes were watering. 5 minutes later, he was pressing his water glass like it was a lifeline. I flagged down our waiter, very politely asked for a glass of whole milk, and when it arrived, I slid it across the table to Ethan without a word. He looked at the milk. He looked at me. Some internal war happened on his face between pride and the actual physical sensation of his mouth being on fire. The physical sensation won. He picked up the milk and drank half of it in one go. I handed him a piece of bread. He took it, ate it, and then put both elbows on the table, which I was fairly certain Ethan Evans had never done in a restaurant in his adult life, and dropped his face into his hands. "I looked at the wrong line on the menu," he said, muffled through his palms. "I know," I said, kindly. "I wanted to look impressive." "You look very impressive," I said. "You finished a third of it before the tears started. That is genuinely impressive." He looked up from his hands and stared at me, and then he laughed, really laughed, the same open laugh from earlier, and this time it came with an expression so unguarded and warm that it landed somewhere in my chest and stayed there. We split my pasta for the rest of dinner. He had 2 more glasses of milk. By dessert, we were talking like we had known each other for years, and when the check came, he paid before I could even reach for my wallet, and looked quietly satisfied about it. Outside, on the sidewalk, with the October air crisp around us, he turned to me and said with the same formal gravity he used in board meetings, "Jordan, I have been trying to find a reasonable way to tell you that I find you that I think you are. I have been aware of you for quite some time, and I would like to." "Ethan," I said. He stopped. "Yes? Would you like to ask me to be your boyfriend?" The pause lasted exactly 2 seconds. Then, "Yes," desperately. I looked at him, all 6'2" of him, the most classically handsome man I had ever personally encountered, standing on a village sidewalk with slightly watery eyes from the Calabrian chili and an expression like he was waiting for a verdict that could go either way. And I thought about the folder on the desktop, the 7 drafts of the poem, the entry about the pale blue tie. "Yes," I said. His smile, when it came, was nothing like anything I had ever seen him at the office. It was soft and a little stunned and completely real. We walked 3 blocks before we were clear of any familiar-looking restaurant patrons, and then he reached over and took my hand and kept it for the whole walk to the subway. We agreed on the way home that we would be careful at work, professional. No one needed to know, and frankly, the office dynamics did not need the complication. He had a reputation to maintain, a terrifying one, apparently, which he was a little sheepish about when I brought it up, and I had a team who needed me to see me as a neutral professional, not the CEO's partner.
"We can still," he started. "If we're alone," I said. "Elevator, office, parking garage, that's fine." He squeezed my hand. "Deal." And then, right there at the corner of Bleecker and 6th, with absolutely zero witnesses, Ethan Evans leaned down and kissed me quietly on the side of my head and said, "Thank you for not being scared of me." I thought about Derek hiding under his desk. I thought about the 50-degree thermostat. I thought about the folder on the desktop labeled with the most earnest, most ridiculous title in the history of romantic pursuits. "I was a little scared of you," I admitted. "Before. And now?" "Now I know you cry at spicy pasta," I said. "It humanizes you." He groaned. I laughed, and that was that. Here is the thing about secretly dating someone who has a terrifying public persona. It is extremely entertaining. Within a week of our first date, I had developed what I can only call a very specific skill set. Ethan in public was still the Ice King, measured, exacting, the kind of man whose raised eyebrow could cause a senior director to reconsider their entire quarterly plan. But I had now seen Ethan Evans attempt to make pancakes at 7 in the morning while wearing a novelty apron covered with little stars and moons that he owned for absolutely no explainable reason, and I had lost the ability to fully fear him. What I discovered was that I had accidentally become, in the words of Marcus, his assistant, the only person in the building immune to the glare. It started in the October operations meeting. Ethan was not happy with the logistics team's Q4 proposal. I could tell because his expression had gone from neutral authority to ice forming on the surface of a still lake, which was a subtle shift that most people in the room had not yet clocked. The logistics director, a very competent woman named Susan, who had been with the company for 11 years, was starting to shrink slightly in her chair. From across the conference table, I caught Ethan's eye. I smiled at him, just a small one, the kind that said, "I know you're about to be unreasonable, and I know the reason you're about to be unreasonable is because you had a rough morning and your coffee was cold, and also, I think you're being a little harsh." He looked at me for 1 second. His jaw unclenched almost imperceptibly. He reached for his water glass, took a sip, and choked on it slightly, which he covered smoothly with a cough. "Let's revisit the third quarter benchmarks before we finalize this," he said, in a tone that was, by his standards, almost gentle. Susan exhaled. The room exhaled. I looked back at my notes. This happened 3 more times that week. Once in a budget review, once at a hallway when he was clearly about to reduce an intern to rubble for sending a misdirected email, once in his own office when I appeared in his doorway with a coffee and a look, and he stopped mid-scowl, blinked, and said, "I'll reschedule the call," to absolutely nobody, before closing his laptop with the energy of a man standing down from a very small war. It took about 2 weeks before the office noticed. The first person to bring it to me was Tom Chen, the Director of Strategic Partnerships. He appeared at my desk on a Wednesday morning holding a manila folder like a peace offering and said somewhat humbly, "Jordan, I heard you might be able to help." "Help with what, Tom?" He slid the folder across my desk. "The Evans-Novak partnership proposal. He rejected it in September." I looked at the folder, then back at Tom. "Why would I be able to help with this?" Tom gave me a look, the look of a man who had watched me make the CEO choke on his water from across a conference table. Everyone saw what happened in the operations meeting. I picked up the folder. "I can take a look and see if there are areas to strengthen before you resubmit." His expression flooded with relief. "Thank you. I will owe you one." "A large oat milk latte from the place on 47th would be a nice gesture," I said pleasantly. He brought it within the hour. By the end of the month, I had a quiet, completely informal, and absolutely unspoken system going. Department heads would appear at my desk, always casually,
always with beverages, and they would slide proposals my way for feedback. I would review them, note the places where they had legitimate points that had been buried under poor framing, and pass them back with some suggestions. When those same proposals came up in meetings, I would occasionally catch Ethan's eye at the right moment. Priya, who saw everything that happened within 10 feet of our shared desk cluster, started calling me the CEO tamer within earshot of about half the floor. It stuck immediately. She was not even slightly sorry. Ethan found out about it on a Friday evening when I told him myself, because we were having dinner at his apartment in the West 50s, and he was laughing about something Tom Chen had said to him that afternoon, something about being grateful for the proposal revisions. He stopped laughing. The proposal revisions? I gave some feedback, yes. Tom told me the proposal was completely reworked. He said it was thanks to the communications team. It was thanks to the communications team, I said, pointing at myself. He stared at me. Jordan, I give honest professional feedback. Your staff's proposals get stronger. You make better decisions because the proposals are better. I do not see the problem. There was a long pause. Then he pinched the bridge of his nose and said, "Are people calling you the CEO tamer?" Reportedly. Another pause. That's accurate, I offered. Incredibly embarrassing for me, he finished, but he was smiling when he said it. That soft, unguarded smile that I had decided was my single favorite thing in New York City. Don't stop. I wasn't planning to, I said. Also, your operations VP brought me a cinnamon roll yesterday, a large one, from Magnolia. I cannot in good conscience give that back. He covered his face with his hand. I cannot believe this is my life. It was a very good life, though. Both of us were aware of that. The secret dating era had its own rhythm. At work, professional, formal, the correct amount of distance. In the elevator alone, his hand would find mine before the doors had fully closed. In the parking garage in the evening, he would wait for me at my car approximately 4 times a week, which he claimed was a coincidence and which I clocked from the security camera timestamps Priya accidentally showed me once. In his office on late nights, he kept a second coffee mug on the credenza behind his desk that was specifically the right size for my oat milk lattes, which he had absolutely bought for that purpose and would not admit to. The soft kisses accumulated like small, private punctuation marks. A quick one in the back of a corridor when a meeting ended, one pressed to my temple in the supply closet on the 32nd floor when we both ended up there simultaneously reaching for printer paper, one that lasted a little longer than quick at the window of his office at 7:30 on a Thursday evening, with all of Manhattan glittering below us and his forehead resting against mine, and him saying very quietly, "I'm glad you opened the folder." "I'm glad you used my birthday," I said. He made an embarrassed noise. I kissed him again. Ethan Evans suggested Dave & Buster's on a Saturday. I have to say that when he first proposed it, I thought I had misheard him. The man wore Italian suits to the office. The man had opinions about wine temperature. The man kept his office at 50 degrees because he believed physical discomfort sharpened focus. He wanted to go to Dave & Buster's. He was, I was beginning to understand, deeply and fundamentally a dork, and he had just been successfully hiding it behind excellent tailoring and a well-maintained scowl for the better part of 35 years. We were at the Midtown location by noon. He was in a gray Henley and jeans and looked so relaxed and approachable that 2 separate people in line did a small double-take, as if recognizing someone famous but not being able to place them. He discovered the claw machine at approximately the 20-minute mark. I knew immediately that this was going to become an event. There was a blue stuffed elephant in the machine, and I said offhandedly that it was cute. And that was it. That was the fuse I accidentally lit. Ethan Evans spent 45 minutes and what I estimated was $160 in game credits attempting to extract that elephant. He had the focus of someone defusing a bomb. He leaned over the machine. He studied the claw's mechanics. He muttered to himself. He tried different angles. He started fresh strategies. He politely declined when a small child nearby offered what the child believed to be helpful advice, then reconsidered, crouched down to the child's level and had a very earnest 3-minute conversation about the mechanical advantage of targeting the elephant's ear versus its body. I sat on a nearby bench and watched this happen with a deep, abiding love of someone who had seen the romantic poetry and therefore fully understood that this level of focus was just who Ethan Evans was. On attempt 14, the claw caught the elephant's ear, lifted it, carried it the entire distance, and dropped it directly into the chute. Ethan straightened up, retrieved the elephant, turned around, and held it out to me with an expression of such profound triumph that I actually laughed out loud and said, "You absolute menace." He looked extremely pleased with himself. He was also slightly pink. He pushed the elephant into my hands and said, "You said it was cute." "It is cute," I said. "So are you," he said, very quickly, looking away, which was so unexpected and so completely un-CEO-like that I just stared at him for a second before pulling him by the sleeve of his Henley and pressing a kiss to his cheek, right there in the middle of Dave & Buster's. And if anyone noticed, I did not care even slightly. He beamed. He actually beamed, like a kid who had just won the science fair. I named the elephant Pretzel, after the building dog. Ethan objected to this for approximately 4 minutes before accepting it as fitting. His idea again. "I'll cook," he said, with a confidence that I was later forced to reassess. We had a full Sunday and steady rain against the apartment windows. He had bought groceries from Whole Foods with the energy of someone who had consulted a recipe and felt good about it. I offered to help twice and was told twice that he had it under control. He was wearing the star and moon apron I had first witnessed on my 3rd visit to his apartment. He looked deeply unserious in it and completely unaware of how unserious he looked, and that combination was somehow unbearably endearing. He burned the rice, not a little. The bottom of the pot was completely blackened. The kitchen smelled like smoke and ambition. He stood over it for a moment in silence, spatula in hand, dignity leaving his body in real time. "The rice is done." "It is done," I agreed, looking into the pot. "I had it on the wrong burner for 12 minutes. "I figured." He put the pot in the sink with great ceremony, as if giving it a proper burial. Then he turned and looked at me with an expression of such profound defeat that I started laughing. And once I started, I could not stop. And he watched me laugh for a second before he started too. That same helpless open laugh that had gotten me at Carbone. We made instant ramen from the package at the back of his cabinet. We sat on the kitchen floor because the stools at his counter were too tall, and I had made a comment about my back, and he immediately said, "Kitchen floor then," like it was the most natural solution. We sat with our backs against the cabinet and our legs stretched out and our bowls of instant noodles. And he told me about growing up in Chicago, about his mother who had also burned rice regularly and considered it a minor tragedy each time. And I told him about my grandmother in Georgia, who could make anything from scratch, and had once been genuinely offended that anyone had ever invented a microwave. At some point, the bowls were empty, and we were just sitting there, shoulder to shoulder, with the rain on the windows and the faint sound of the city below. And he looked over at me with an expression I did not know how to name except to say that it was the exact opposite of every face he wore at work. Quiet, open, like he was not performing anything. I turned toward him at the same time he turned toward me, and then we were kissing. A real kiss, slow and warm and completely unhurried, on his kitchen floor in the middle of a Sunday. And when we pulled back, he pressed his forehead to mine and said, very quietly, "I'm sorry about the rice." "I'll teach you," I said. "Yeah?" "Next Sunday." He smiled against my forehead. "Deal." We stayed on the kitchen floor for another hour. He had ramen broth on his apron. I did not tell him. 2 months into what I have now taken to calling, privately and with great affection, the Dork dynasty, we almost made it to Christmas without anyone finding out. Almost. The company-wide Q4 corporate broadcast is a big deal at Evans & Whitmore. It goes out to every department, all 13 floors of the building, plus the Chicago and LA offices via live stream. Ethan records his portion as a live address from his office, which is then fed through the building intercom system and broadcast simultaneously for the in-office segment. The AV team always does a full setup an hour before, and the broadcast window is from 2 to 2:30. It was 1:58. I was in my office 2 doors down from his, finishing the written copy for our year-end communications digest, when my phone buzzed. It was Ethan. "Are you coming to observe the broadcast?" I smiled at my screen. We had been trading texts like this all day, the kind that look professional if someone else sees them, but are not professional. I was very good at maintaining plausible deniability. "In 5 minutes. Did you eat lunch?" "I had half a sandwich." "Ethan." "It was a large sandwich." I shook my head at my phone, finished the paragraph I was working on, and then called him just to check in, the way I always did before a big broadcast. Professional check-in, communications head to CEO. Normal. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey," he said, and immediately his voice was different from the board meeting voice. Softer. The word "hey" had approximately 70 degrees of warmth in it than anything he said in a professional context, which I had become intimately acquainted with. "Are you ready?" I asked. "Mostly. Marcus printed the wrong version of the closing statement, so I'm reading off my phone. And wait, hold on. Are we getting barbecue tonight? You said you might." I leaned back in my chair. "I said you might." "You said, and I quote, 'If you finish the Hargreaves report before Thursday, we can do barbecue.'" "It is Tuesday." "I finished it an hour ago. I sent you the draft." I actually pulled up my email to check. He had, in fact, sent the draft at 1:47. I scrolled through it. It was solid. It might have even been very good. "Okay," I said. "Fine. Barbecue." "Hill Country on 26th?" he asked with the energy of someone who had already decided on Hill Country on 26th. "Yes," I said. "Also, don't forget—" "Baby, you promised," he said. I paused. "I just said yes." I know, but you're the cutest. You know that, right? Don't forget to bring me the coffee you made this morning. Marcus makes it too strong, and you know how jealous you get when I drink his." "I do not get jealous of your assistant's coffee." "You made a comment last week." "I made an observation about the roast level." "You made the most professional jealous of coffee face I have ever seen on a human person." "There is no such face." "No," he said, warmly, in the voice he only ever used when we were alone. "You hang up first." "We are adults," I said. "You hang up first." "Ethan Evans, you are a 35-year-old CEO of a Fortune—" "You hang up first." I was smiling so hard I could barely hold the phone. "You first." "Never. I can do this all day. I cleared my schedule." I laughed. "Fine. I'll bring the coffee. See you in 3 minutes." 3 minutes, he confirmed, sounding thoroughly pleased with himself. "You're the cutest." "Stop saying that." "I'll stop when it stops being true, which is never. You hang up." I hung up. I sat there for a second, grinning at my phone, and then I stood, grabbed the coffee I had made that morning in the small machine I kept on my credenza. Yes, I knew he preferred mine, and yes, I did feel a certain way about Marcus's coffee, and no, I was not prepared to examine that, and walked toward the hallway. The hallway was silent. Not regular professional quiet, not the ambient hum of keyboards and distant phone calls, the specific, loaded, deeply significant silence of approximately 100 people who had all heard something simultaneously and were now processing it. I stopped walking. I looked at the open-plan floor. 100 employees were sitting very still at their desks, all of them wearing the expression of people who had just heard something they were not supposed to hear and were not sure how to file it. I looked at the speakers. The broadcast intercom. The broadcast intercom that the AV team sets up an hour early. The broadcast intercom that had been live since 1:58. The entire phone call, Hill Country BBQ, baby, you promised, you're the cutest, the coffee jealousy analysis, the full and complete you hang up first negotiation, had just gone out over the building-wide intercom system to all 13 floors plus the Chicago and LA offices. I stood in the hallway holding a coffee mug. From Ethan's office at the end of the hallway, after about 4 full seconds of silence, the door opened. Ethan Evans stepped out. He was in full CEO configuration, perfect suit, perfect posture, the expression of total authority. He looked out at the floor. He saw 100 people staring back at him. He held the look for approximately 2 seconds, which was his standard intimidation window. It did not work, because everyone on this floor had just heard him say, "Baby, you promised we'd have BBQ, and no, you hang up first," and there was simply no coming back from that with a single boardroom stare. His eyes landed on me in the hallway. I watched his face go through approximately 6 stages in 4 seconds. Confusion, dawning realization, horror. A brief visit to some private internal devastation, a second attempt at authoritative composure, the complete failure of that second attempt. The tips of his ears went crimson. He stepped back inside his office and closed the door. The building remained in absolute silence for another 3 seconds. Then, from somewhere in the direction of accounts payable, someone let out a single, barely contained sound that was halfway between a laugh and a cough, and then immediately suppressed it with such force that I could hear the effort. I stood in the hallway for a moment. Then I smoothed my jacket, adjusted the coffee mug in my hand, and walked across the floor. Everyone watched me. I gave the floor a professional nod, the neutral, pleasant nod of a communications head who was simply moving through the office with a beverage. Nothing to see here, all very normal. And walked to the end of the hallway. I knocked twice on the oak door. Nothing. I knocked again. "Mr. Evans?" A long pause. Then, muffled and mortified, "Come in." I opened the door and stepped inside. He was standing in the middle of the office with his hands in his pockets, which was his version of looking casual, which he absolutely was not. His face was somewhere between pink and crimson, and he was staring at a fixed point on the far wall with the focused intensity of a man trying to project calm through sheer determination. I walked over, set the coffee on his desk, and stood in front of him. He looked at the coffee. He looked at me. He opened his mouth. "Don't," I said kindly. He closed his mouth. "The broadcast doesn't go live until 2. This was a technical oversight. Those happen. I will send a brief internal note acknowledging a pre-broadcast audio check, and by Thursday, this'll be a story people tell at company happy hours for the next decade and nothing more." He stared at me. "That's the damage control version." "That is the only version," I said. "You are still the CEO. You are still absolutely formidable. You just also have demonstrably human feelings, and that is not actually a weakness." He looked like he was weighing this. Then he looked down at the coffee. "You brought the coffee," he said. "I said I would. Even though—" "Ethan," I picked up the mug and held it out to him. "The BBQ is still on. Hill Country, 7 o'clock, and your secret identity as a very large softie is completely safe with me." He took the mug. His hands wrapped around it, and something in his face settled, the tension going out of his shoulders in that quiet way it always did when it was just the two of us. He looked at me for a long moment with the expression I had first seen on a kitchen floor in the rain, the one I had decided to spend a considerable amount of time collecting. "I'm not a softie," he said, with absolutely zero conviction. "You spent 45 minutes at a claw machine," I said. "That was strategic problem solving." "You cried a little at the end of Hachi when I put it on last weekend." "There was dust." "Ethan, it was a very dusty evening." I smiled. He smiled back, the real one, and then he put the coffee down on his desk, took one step forward and kissed me, a soft, quick, private one, the kind we had been collecting for 2 months in elevators and parking garages and supply closets. And in that moment in his office, with the whole company presumably still processing the intercom incident 2 hallways away, I thought that I had accidentally grabbed a laptop 6 weeks ago and opened a folder and found a person under all the ice who had been carefully, earnestly, a little ridiculously, loving me since long before I knew to look. "I'm going to have to walk back out there," he said against my forehead. "Yes," I agreed. "They all heard everything. Most of it, the good parts." He made a pained noise. I patted his arm. "Go be terrifying. You're very good at it." He straightened up, adjusted his jacket, put back the ice, or as much as he could locate on short notice, which was maybe 70% of the usual. He walked to the door, opened it, and stepped back out into the hallway. From my position just inside the office, I watched him survey the floor. He crossed his arms. The remaining 70% of the ice settled over his expression. He let the silence sit for a full 5 seconds. "The Q4 broadcast begins at 2, he said in his deep, perfectly controlled boardroom voice. "Anyone not at their desk by then can work through the holidays." There was a very fast, very quiet scramble back to workstations. He turned around and came back inside. He closed the door behind him, leaned against it, and let out a long breath. "Still got it," I said. "Barely." He picked up his coffee, took a sip. His ears were still pink, but the rest of him had recalibrated it as something more like peace. "You know they're never going to let this go." "No," I agreed. "They are not." "The tamer angle is only going to get worse." "Dramatically worse," I confirmed. He nodded slowly. He looked out the window at Manhattan. Autumn going orange and gold below us. The city doing its city thing, indifferent and magnificent. He reached over without looking at me and took my hand, the way he had on a Brooklyn sidewalk on the first night, easy and certain. "Hill country at 7, he said. "Hill country at 7, I said. We stood there for a minute, the two of us, hand in hand in front of a wall of windows 42 floors up, while somewhere in the building below us, 100 people were going to be talking about this until at least the following spring. Marcus would probably need to schedule extra press briefings. Tom from Strategic Partnerships was going to bring me the nicest cinnamon roll anyone had ever purchased. Derek from Accounts Payable would text me 3 prayer hands emojis. And Ethan Evans, CEO of Evans and Whitmore Communications, the Ice King of Midtown Manhattan, a man who kept his office at 50 degrees and wrote 7 drafts of a poem about my eyes and spent $160 on a stuffed elephant named Pretzel and could not hang up a phone without saying, "You hang up first," at least 4 times. That man was holding my hand and looking out at the city with the expression of someone who had, against all professional odds and in spite of himself, gotten exactly what he had been planning for in a folder on his desktop. I had the folder, by the way. I made a copy before returning the laptop. I keep it in a folder of my own. It is labeled "Evidence that the Ice King was always a hopeless romantic, and I love him for it." He has not found it yet. When he does, I imagine his ears will be very red. I am looking forward to it. The end.